Hey, what's up you guys? Welcome to another video. As you probably saw on my social media, I've recently released 3 more programs onto the Hybrid Method personal training app. So not only do we have a hybrid program, but now we have a build which is focused on strength training. We have a functional program which is focused around Hyrox and DECA training. And then we also have a run program. So for those people that just want to focus on building their power, speed, or endurance on running, that is now available in the Hybrid Method personal training app. There is a link below this video for you to check out. Last week, I was talking to a client who just signed on who is starting the run program. He is a day 1 runner, no background with running whatsoever. And we started to talk a little bit about some of the questions that come up around like gear, intensity levels, volume, stuff like that. And it really got me to start to think about like some of the things that I wish I knew before I started running. So for today's video, we're going to cover the 7 things that I wish I knew before I started running. Jumping into tip number 1, let's talk about gear. Now, when I think of gear, I think of 2 different categories, shoes and socks. But let's start with shoes. One of the things that I really wish that I knew early about shoes was all of this extra padding that we see in the new technology with shoes is not always the best thing. Now, this is just my opinion, but I'm not a big fan of having shoes that are pretty much like platforms where you don't have any connection between your foot and the ground. I'm a big advocate for allowing the feet to develop muscles within the feet, but also being able to have a toe box that's wide where the toes could sprawl out. One of the things that I didn't know early on in my running career was that the super tight shoes that I used to wear actually forced my toes to curl in. And I immediately noticed that those toenails would get black or fall off. And once I got rid of those narrow toe shoes and went to a wider toe box, I started to see that my toes started to sprawl out the same way that my fingers do on my hands. I also noticed that I started to get less injuries around my ankles and my feet because I started to get more blood flow within those areas. So 2 things around shoes. Allow the foot to breathe by getting a little bit of a bigger size and maybe go for a wider toe box to allow the toes to sprawl out. Now you might be asking yourself like, what is the right shoe for me? If there's a running store nearby your house, I'm always a big advocate for going to some of those running stores that either have a treadmill with cameras where they can look at the way you walk or your gait or the way that you strike the ground, and from there they can tell you what shoe may be best. For brands on shoes, I'm a big fan of New Balance for road running. For my trail running, I do like the company Altra. Now pivoting over to socks, there are 2 companies that I love using. The first one is Stance. They have designated running socks that give you support around the arch, but also the back around your Achilles. When it comes to my longer runs, I'm a big fan of Injiji because they have socks that are toe socks and they allow space between the toes for those longer runs. The longer you run, the more your feet swell up, so you want to allow your feet to have that space to inflate while continuing to allow blood flow. Jumping into tip number 2, which is around intensity. When I first got into ultra distance running, I used to think that every single run needed to be a high intensity PR run, and that simply just isn't the truth. I learned about the 80-20 rule where 80% of your running should be done in an easy pace and 20% should be spent either on speed or power. But this video is really geared towards the beginners, the day 1 runners. And so when I think of like intensity levels, I think of 3 different levels. We have your easy running, which is also known as your base running. A good way to determine if you don't have any like technology or wearables, which we'll talk about in a little bit, a good way to tell if you're in your easy pace or base pace are 2 different ways. Number 1, can you breathe in and out through your nose while running? That's a good indicator to say whether you're going too fast or you're in the right zone. The second way to tell if you're in the easy pace is, are you able to have a conversation the way I'm talking to you right now? If you are, that means you're in an easy pace. If you can get a few words out and maybe you're having to get a couple breaths in, you're jumping into the second zone, which we'll talk about now, which is race pace. I like to think of race pace as you're fast, but not your fastest. You're able to say a couple words, but not full sentences. And then the third zone, this is the sprint zone. This is super high intensity. You're not able to say much. You're gasping for air. And typically you're only able to hold this sprint for about 60 seconds or so, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more, but we are not having a conversation and this is super quick. So just going back to those intensity levels, we want to be spending 80% of that time in that easy zone base running where we can have the conversation, and the other 20% is in that race or sprint zone. This is a great segue into tip number 3, which is tracking duration over distance. So what do I mean by that? When it comes to starting off with running, I always feel that it's best to track how much time you're running versus how far you've ran. And the reason why is because it's easier to manage your intensity levels with time. Let's say, for example, you are a day 1 runner and you can't run a mile yet. That's totally okay. But let's say we want to put you on a program where we start you off with jogging for 1 minute and then you're going to walk for 2 minutes. So 3 minutes total. We do that day 1. Day 2, we double that. So we do 1 minute of jogging, 2 minutes of walking, repeat that for 2 circuits. Now you've bumped up 2 minutes of running and 4 minutes of walking. If you look at a program and the first day says we're gonna run 3 miles, you're gonna look at it and say, I can't run that much, throw the program away and probably not start running. So that's why I'm a big advocate for tracking duration versus distance. And this leads us into tip number 4, which is think long term. So let's go back to that example of jogging for a minute and walking for 2. One of the rules that I like to follow when it comes to progressive overload, so building upon what we've done in the past, is I never want to exceed my weekly volume, so how much I'm running, by 10% from the previous week. So let's say, for example, in week 1, you got up to 10 minutes of running. We know that in week 2, we don't want to exceed 11 minutes of running for that next week. We want to stay safe and consistent with our progressive overload. In an ideal world, if you were to follow that protocol of 10% week over week, within 6 months, you'll be running consistently for roughly 90 minutes. So if you're only running 10 minutes in 1 week, don't be discouraged, because you'll be at the 60-minute mark, 90-minute mark, 120-minute mark in the months to come. Tip number 5 is around fuel. Now, this is very personalized, so I can only speak around my experience with running, whether it's a high intensity run or a long distance run. Some people like to run fasted, and for me, it just depends on the run that I have for the day. It also depends on if you're a morning runner, lunch runner, or evening runner. For me, I like to do my running in the morning. So if a run is an hour or less, I typically do that in a fasted state. If anything is getting to about the 90-minute mark, 2-hour mark, I always like to have some fuel. Typically it's a banana, piece of toast with honey, very simple foods that I can digest easily, nothing too heavy on the stomach, because I don't want that to bog me down during the run. But if there is one thing I would recommend before any run, especially if you're doing it in the morning, have a glass of water with a pinch of salt or electrolytes. The reason why this is super important is because you're waking up in a fasted state and you're at your most dehydrated state. You didn't drink while you were sleeping, so it's always important to at least have that glass of water before you go hit that run in the morning. Now let's jump into tip number 6, which is about warming up and cooling down. So there's a lot of questions around what type of stretching should I do? Should I do long holds? Should I do quick pace? What is the real answer? And what I found work best for me is when it comes to warm-ups, I like to do dynamic movements and mobility before my workouts. What do I mean by that? So when it comes to the dynamic movements, I'll do some high knees, I'll do some quick jumps, some side shuffles, stuff like that. I'll also do some mobility drills, some 90-90s to open up the hips, some thoracic spine rotations. I have some videos on this YouTube channel if you want to see what my morning mobility routine is. After I do some dynamic stretching and mobility, I'll do the workout. And then after the workout, I'm a big advocate for static stretching. The reason why is because after that muscle becomes so tight from any kind of run, I want to open that back up, and I'm not going to be doing any kind of activity within 4 hours of that run. So I want to allow some time to open that muscle up and let it come back together naturally by doing some static stretching only post-workout. And then for the final tip, number 7, and that is around technology. So that's going to be around software and apps and wearables. Let's talk about wearables first. For me, I'm a big advocate for having a running watch and also a chest strap to track your heart rate. There's a lot of wearables, whether it's a watch or a Whoop or a Fitbit, whatever it may be, that will track your heart rate from the wrist. But the reality is those wrist heart rate monitors do not give you accurate numbers. So I always recommend having some type of chest strap that's right next to the heart that syncs with your iWatch or your Garmin. I'm a big fan for the Garmin because I don't want to be looking at an Apple iWatch seeing text messages come through. This is a time where I want to be disconnected from everything, disconnected from all the notifications. So I'm an anti-iWatch guy, but a big advocate for the Garmin watches. Jumping into the software and apps, there's a lot of different things that you can use from Garmin, Apple, Strava. For me, I'm a big fan of using Strava's social network for athletes. You can connect with friends to see what kind of workouts they're doing. It also tracks your performance around your heart rate and your intensity level, so it can show that you're becoming more efficient as a runner, and it does allow you to share those workouts in an easy manner. So there you have it. Those are the 7 things that I wish I knew before I started running. Again, if you are interested to check out some of the running programs that I offer through the Hybrid Method personal training app, there's a link below this video for you to check out. I also have links to my Strava profile plus my social media platforms where I do share more workouts that we have on the app if you want to see it that way. If you have any questions or concerns, please leave them in the comment section below. I appreciate you watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.